Welcome back to the Miles in My Shoes video series. I'm your host, Chris Richardson, and today we're going to talk about microaggressions. First, I'd like to read the official Merriam-Webster definition for microaggression. The official definition is a comment or action that subtly and often unconsciously or unintentionally expresses a prejudiced attitude toward a member of a marginalized group, such as a racial minority. Now, I can tell you right now that whenever we start to talk about things like microaggressions and racism and discrimination in the workplace, oftentimes we get that proverbial eye roll where people are just like, okay, here we go again. It's the victim situation where everyone is feeling sensitive or everyone is offended. Guys, whether we're talking about social issues or technological shifts and change, I tend to look at it through the lens of a pendulum type theory. Oftentimes, what we should be seeking is balance. I can remember there was a time when everyone had an office with a door, and now, fast forward to 2019, the cool thing or the end thing is to have a bullpen type working environment. There's no perfect answer, but we should constantly be seeking balance through the sharing of perspective, right? A few of the things that you hear me talk about today in reference to microaggressions may be uncomfortable topics, both for myself and hard to hear. However, in terms of seeking balance as a society, it's important to get a little uncomfortable, and sometimes we have to share uncomfortable truths. I hear this rhetoric in today's society that there's too much victim blaming or there's too much sensitivity and everyone is offended by everything, right? Now, there has to be a balance when we talk about these sorts of things or we reflect upon them. And I do believe that cancel culture and maybe society being perhaps a bit too sensitive when it comes to certain things, it is a real thing. But it all depends on perspective and how you look at it and the viewpoint from which you're coming from. When it comes to microaggressions, one of the solutions that I hear is that if people perhaps be more open to talking about things, and instead of avoiding confrontation, if you're offended or if someone commits a microaggression against you, talk to that person, educate that person, let them know where you're coming from and what your viewpoint is and how you feel about it. And to be honest, guys, I seek a world in which that is the solution and that is a normal cadence. However, it is not a perfect world that we live in. A higher calling is to seek a world where perhaps we don't have to have as many as those types of conversations or those types of confrontations, however friendly they may be. If we are going to have an appropriate conversation about confrontation and healthy confrontation and taking the responsibility of educating people by letting them know that they've committed a microaggression against you, as opposed to maybe making a Facebook post about it or maybe going around the person and putting it out to the public and ruining their lives or careers. There are subtle nuances that we have to think about. I'd like to get personal and read a couple microaggressions that have been committed against me that I've dealt with for years that kind of hit me in a deep place. Chris, you're so different because you're always so composed and well-spoken. You're not like the rest. Mixed babies are the cutest, and you hit the lottery because your children's skin took more after their mothers, and it's a good mix. Here's one that hit pretty hard because it wasn't said to me, but it was said to my son by another student at his school. If you don't watch it, I'm going to give you 2 black eyes. Oh, wait, you already have 2 of them. I've been hearing these comments about the way that I speak and the way that I carry and present myself since I was 5. I grew up in the Deep South, so I'm no stranger to comments about me differentiating me from my peers or other African Americans in ways that seem a bit like they're backhanded compliments. What's been more difficult is having these sorts of microaggressions committed against my children. You know, having a mixed race family can be a very difficult thing no matter where you live. Now, keep in mind also, when these comments are made about whether it's my daughter or my son, they're like, oh my gosh, they're so cute. I'm so glad their skin is a lighter tone. You must be so happy. Think about that. There's a dear friend of mine, John Jones, who also speaks and shares his views on and perspective on different issues that are difficult for us to talk about. And he and I grew up together. I respect John. He's a very intelligent person. And he and I have always grown up being typecast a certain way, but knowing what it's like to have deeper layers to you. Now, like myself, John is tall. I'm 6'3", John is 6'5". John is a larger individual. He's north of 250 pounds, and I'm not very small myself. So therefore, when we talk about not being afraid of confrontation or talking to people, I have to be very careful about the way that I move through this world. There's such a thing as people being threatened by you depending on your size or depending on your race and depending on what preconceived notions they have about you. It's very difficult as a parent, and people of any race can identify with this. It's difficult as a parent to have a situation where the school calls you and not only did another kid threaten your son, but they made a racial remark or a racial microaggression. How would you deal with that if you were me? very carefully. Now, the school took it very seriously, and I think that they're handling the issue appropriately. But there's that moment when you're talking about it and you're digesting it where I have to center myself before I go up to the school to talk to the principal. And I have to make sure that I get myself in check so that I handle the situation appropriately. And I'm just saying that depending on who you are, depending on what your background is, it's not often easy to just address and have a comfortable confrontation when it comes to certain issues when you look differently or when you have different experiences. In terms of what my call to action, why did I bring you here today? Why am I talking to you about microaggressions? I look at microaggressions as a part of a cultural database that we all need to be mindful of. When you think of the concept of a database, the more data you have, the more powerful it is. So in my mind, I started this series and I have conversations like this, not because it makes me comfortable. I don't feel great about sharing those things that I've experienced in terms of my skin color, in terms of the comments that were made to my children and my different experiences, but I do it because it's necessary. There are those of you that may identify with what I'm talking about, and you may hear those comments and say, yep, I get it. There are some of you that may feel horrified. Then there are some of you that may feel, okay, I don't see the big deal. I don't see why this has to be a racial thing. The importance here, though, is that there are most of you, or I'm hoping most of you, that are willing to learn and maybe change your perspective. Maybe when you hear something or you hear a comment or you hear a particular viewpoint, maybe understanding that if you look at it through a different lens or the lens of someone else, the effects of what is being said can have devastating effects. And sometimes they're positive and sometimes they're negative. The benefit to this video and me opening up and sharing just a small modicum of my truth is that there may be those of you that aren't aware of these things as microaggressions, or maybe thought that some of those statements that were made are okay. They're not okay, right? But then also going to a deeper vein, there's some of you that perhaps may not have an enlightened perspective when it comes to how easy or how difficult it may be to have an open and honest and healthy conversation. I had another friend, Chad Pate, that commented on a post that I put out that he had a very valid viewpoint. But I know Chad. I know his backstory, and I know that he's a good human being, and it comes from a good place. So in his mind, okay, hey, the answer here is having an open and honest dialogue and confronting that person, and then maybe sharing your own perspective. And then maybe once you do that, that person will see that, okay, it was wrong of what I said, or maybe I can think of it being a little bit more sensitive in how I communicate. I'm just saying one thing that I wanted to iterate and stress here today is that that is not always an option. And it's important that the world knows that. It's important that we all subscribe to this cultural database of all perspectives, no matter what race you are, no matter what gender you are, to arm ourselves with the knowledge to be better human beings when we interact with our fellow Americans. The concept of microaggressions is a very robust topic, and we're not going to cover everything in one video. But I wanted to at least share a sliver of my perspective. And please feel free to interact and comment below. I am always open to having a conversation about your personal experiences. And I'd like to thank you guys, those of you that have weighed in, those of you that took the poll, I really appreciate it. For those of you that haven't, in the comments and the details below, we'll let you know where you can go to actively participate and be a part of this conversation. Thank you for watching. I'm your host, Chris Richardson, and we'll see you in the next mile.